Flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for a T0 liftoff. Again, that is coming up at 9:20 a.m. Eastern, 13:20 UTC. Valley. Taking a look at Space Launch Complex 40 or Slick 40. Once the Falcon 9 lifts off from the pad, it will fly in a northeasterly trajectory along the eastern coast of the United States. The lighting is going to make it a little bit difficult to see, but for our friends, probably not too much farther north than northeast Florida, maybe into Georgia, you might be able to catch the Falcon 9 as it makes its ascent. At this time of the morning, though, I would be surprised if folks up in the Carolinas were able to spot the Falcon 9 this morning. But if you do so, be sure to tag us on social media and let us know. Love to see some pictures of it as it makes its flight. Following stage separation, the first stage booster B-1085 will land on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas, marking its first landing. And the payload fairings will also be recovered as well. That is their intent, of course, as SpaceX is working to certify both its boosters as well as its payload fairings for up to 40 missions each. SpaceX saves about $6 million per recovery effort, so certainly within their business interests to do so as much as possible. This is what it looks like when they're bringing one of those fairings on board a recovery vessel following fairing separation. Currently a team program.
Relative to Falcon 9 first stage water intrusion, there was some moisture that went into the fuel in the LOX tank of that booster when it was transported from McGregor to the Cape. The Desiccant system didn't perform the way it was supposed to. That Desiccant system is supposed to keep that air dry, and so it didn't perform the way it was supposed to, so we had to dry those tanks out and then replace a few components on the vehicle. And so getting a shakedown flight of that on a Starlink would be helpful for us. That's just kind of a side benefit of moving from August to September.
And again, that was NASA's Steve Stitch. That move from August to September, part of an intricate shuffling that's been happening connected to the International Space Station, as NASA, SpaceX, and Boeing have been shifting things around a bit on the schedule to accommodate for an extension of the Boeing Starliner crew flight test, as testing both on orbit as well as on the ground has been ongoing to assess whether or not NASA will ultimately decide to bring NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams back to Earth on the Boeing Starliner spacecraft, in which case they will come back, and then the Crew 9 mission, as it is currently manifested, will launch no earlier than September 24th, after being pushed from August to September. That is scenario A. Scenario B would be if NASA ultimately deems Starliner not safe enough to bring Butch and Sonny back, then Starliner will undock in an uncrewed configuration and return for a touchdown in the southwest United States. And then the Crew 9 Dragon would launch with just 2 crew members on board, still no earlier than September 24th. But Butch and Sonny would return on that Dragon vehicle with new SpaceX suits no earlier than February of 2025. So with that adjustment in launch date, and in order to, as Steve Stitch said, shake out the water intrusion issue, make sure everything is ship shape. NASA and SpaceX decided to go ahead and allow this booster to fly a Starlink mission first, which is what brings us to today. But before we got to today, we had yesterday's operation with this Falcon booster, a static fire test for those who were not with us yesterday evening. Just after 7 o'clock, this is what we saw here at the pad. Bit of a low rumble here, so I'll go ahead and talk over it since I'm not really going to be obstructing much natural sound here. Static fire test lasted right about or just under 10 seconds in total from ignition to the conclusion of this static fire. While SpaceX didn't publicly make a statement about the results of the static fire test, by virtue of the fact that they're moving forward with the launch today, we can infer that it was a good static fire and that they are ready to proceed as we are anticipating a liftoff in now less than 38 minutes. At this point, SpaceX will have to make the call on the start of propellant load if in fact they are ready to launch. This timeline of this mission, the sequence of events and a nominal flight following liftoff coming up at 9:20 a.m. Eastern, 13:20 UTC, or in 27 minutes and 26 seconds. Following liftoff, about 1 minute and 12 seconds into the flight, the Falcon 9 rocket will begin to pass through max Q, or the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. That'll be followed by a few events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO. That'll be followed by stage separation, and then second stage engine ignition, or SES-1, capped off by the payload fairings being jettisoned at the 3-minute mark. About 3 minutes later, the first stage entry burn lasting 23 seconds. That will begin at T plus 6 minutes and 3 seconds. That'll be followed by the landing burn ignition starting at T plus 7 minutes and 50 seconds, with the booster touching down on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas, at about T plus 8 minutes and 14 seconds. Shortly after that, the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage will begin, or will be cut off, enter into a coasting phase at T plus 8 minutes and 42 seconds. Following that, about T plus 54 minutes and 57 seconds, the Merlin will reignite for a brief 1-second burn, circularizing the orbit before the Starlink satellites are deployed at T plus 1 hour, 3 minutes, and 51 seconds. Currently T minus 24 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. Again, at this point, SpaceX will be loading cryogenic helium on board the storage tanks on the second stage now at this point. We're just a few minutes away from the so-called big vent. Currently T minus 23 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. Yesterday, SpaceX and Space Florida at the launch and landing facility welcomed the four-member crew of the Polaris Dawn mission, which is set to launch now in less than a week, coming up on Monday. Amid a myriad of questions that were asked the crew as it was our turn to come up to the mic, spoke with Bill Gerstenmaier with SpaceX and Sarah Gillis, who is also a SpaceX employee, but importantly for Polaris Dawn, she is one of the mission specialists. We talked about the impact of the dynamic Polaris Dawn mission on the certification process for the Crew Dragon spacecraft for missions beyond its currently 5 certified flights. So let's listen into the response from both Bill Gerstenmaier and Sarah Gillis.
There's a couple things. The high altitude will give us exposure to this high radiation environment, which will test a lot of avionics systems and their ability to recover. We build a lot of auto sequences to take care of that for us, but we'll see how it really works. We'll also get a chance to see the laser communication, which I think is a big deal moving forward. And then I think a lot of the suit activities, even though they're not, they're geared more towards mobility. So some of the joints and some of the motion and activities are more geared towards walking on another terrestrial body than they are just doing the EVA. So we're going to learn all that as we move forward. So I think there's a lot of neat technology that this crew has already helped us learn, but now we're going to actually see them demonstrate in space. So I'm pretty excited about this mission and what we're going to learn.
Yeah, and I think just to add one thing, one of the things I'm most excited about from this development effort is all of the learnings that are going to go back into Dragon operation. New software features, how the suits are constructed. There is learning across every single team, materials, engineering, you name it. There has been development and there has been lessons learned. One of my favorite things training crew over crew is seeing how every single flight gets better, and that's what SpaceX does. They take the lessons learned and they immediately incorporate it into future vehicles. So I'm actually really looking forward to the debriefs to just see that comprehensive look at all the lessons we're going to be moving into future human spaceflight.
And again, that was Bill Gerstenmaier, the Vice President of Build and Reliability with SpaceX, as well as Sarah Gillis, a SpaceX employee who helps train Dragon crews, as well as the mission specialist for the Polaris Dawn mission. We'll have much more from that briefing, as well as our other coverage of the Polaris Dawn mission over the coming weeks. So now is a great time to subscribe to Spaceflight Now here on YouTube, as we'll have a series of videos over the next several days leading up to launch. And of course, be sure to join us for our live launch coverage when it begins early Monday morning. T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds, and bang on the money. You see the big vent beginning here as the chill down sequence ahead of second stage LOX load is now beginning. Currently T minus 17 minutes, 27 seconds and counting. Got a little less than a minute left on the big vent before it tapers off in preparation for second stage LOX load beginning at T minus 16 minutes. Currently T minus 16 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. You see the big vent has wrapped up and now second stage LOX load is underway. Taking a look at the live chat, I want to thank the more than 4,600 of you who are joining with us live. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us. Allows more folks to find their way into our live coverage as we're now a little more than 15 minutes away from the planned launch of this Falcon 9 rocket. Speaking of making plans, SpaceX busy as ever making plans for the launch of the aforementioned Polaris Dawn crew. Taking a look at the big box here at Historic Launch Complex 39A, where that quartet will depart from less than a week from now, coming up this Monday. See the transporter erector, the strong back, is beginning to make its way back towards the hangar, paused at the top of the hill, though. Overnight, SpaceX teams have been working to ready this transporter erector for the configuration that will fly a Crew Dragon Falcon 9 flight. Doing some replacement work at the top of the transporter erector, changing things out from the configuration for our payload fairings to one that will support the Dragon operation. So once movement resumes on the strong back of the transporter erector, it will roll all the way into the hangar there, as the Dragon will be integrated with the Falcon 9 first stage booster waiting inside. They will be affixed to the transporter erector and then rolled back out to the pad ahead of launch. In the run up to the Polaris Dawn mission, as was discussed during the rundown of the quarantine schedule ahead of launch for the crew, there will be a dry dress rehearsal we're anticipating on Saturday, and then the Falcon 9 will have a static fire test similar to the one we saw last night ahead of today's Starlink 10-5 mission. Of course, that will happen over at Pad 39A with the booster that will support the Polaris Dawn mission. Liftoff set for the unfortunately painfully early hour of no earlier than 3:38 a.m. They have a 4-hour launch window and 3 launch opportunities within that. So it will be an early morning for us here. Well, to be perfectly honest, it'll be a late night since our live coverage will start well in excess of the point at which we're having liftoff, being that it is a crewed mission. We'll be beginning our live coverage multiple hours ahead of liftoff. We'll have more deters for 12 feet. The majority of that, bottom 2/3, made up by the Falcon 9's first stage. This particular booster, as we've mentioned throughout the broadcast, is making its first flight today, tail number 1085 in the SpaceX fleet. At the base of the first stage booster are 9 Merlin 1D engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs, which are used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Today, they are using the drone ship a shortfall of gravitas. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. In that image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere tail first, like a big old dart heading towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage and a first stage main engine cutoff. High pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. The second stage engine nozzle is also housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9, powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVAC engine. The MVAC engine is equipped with a large nozzle optimized for burns formed in the vacuum space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust and will be fired twice on today's flight to place the 22 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. MVAC engine burns the same propellant mix, that being RP1 and LOX, same as the first stage. It will ignite for a third time after the deployment of the Starlink satellites for a deorbit burn, driving the upper stage back into the atmosphere, where it will burn up, helping to eliminate the risk of any unnecessary space debris on this mission. Finally, at the top of the rocket are the payload fairings, which are a carbon composite, standing 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall, and 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. 2 halves of the payload fairing will be recovered a little further downrange from where the first stage booster lands on the drone ship. They gently splash down under parachutes. Following their recovery, as with the booster, they will be brought into Port Canaveral here on Florida's Space Coast, turned over to Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where they will be refurbished, turned around for future flights. And in the case of the booster, we don't have to wonder what its next flight will be. As we discussed earlier in the broadcast, it will be the SpaceX Crew 9 mission on behalf of NASA, which will either bring 2 people in a secondary backup scenario to account for a contingency with the Boeing Starliner crew flight test, or in a nominal scenario, it will launch with 3 NASA astronauts and 1 cosmonaut from Roscosmos. Currently T-minus 6 minutes, 42 seconds and counting. At this point, the chill down of the 9 Merlin 1D engines is now getting underway. Taking a look at the live chat. First off, I want to thank the more than 8,200 of you who are watching with us live. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us. Lots more folks to find their way into our live coverage. And just looking more specifically at the contents of the live chat, give a tip of the hat to Cobra Emergency for a much appreciated Star Wars reference regarding Booster 1085, watching its progress with great interest. Seen and acknowledged. We're at T-minus 5 minutes, 31 seconds and counting. We're about a minute away from the strong back retract sequence beginning. It'll start with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector, where the strong back will recline about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. Just to clarify any confusion in the live chat, because I see a couple of questions in here. This booster will go on to support the Crew 9 mission in its second launch. The launch today is Starlink 10-5. We are now getting pad images and sound from SpaceX.
Strong back retract is starting.
You hear the call for strong back retract beginning. Just as a quick point of reference or a bit of housekeeping, you'll note our countdown clock slightly differs from what you see from SpaceX in the big box here. Reason for that is our countdown clock is in real time. The SpaceX feed is on about a 5-ish second delay. So we'll be making our call outs in real time, since our team of camera operators are, of course, shooting in real time and don't want to confuse our call outs from what you'll be seeing from their cameras as they track the rocket. We're now T-minus 3 minutes, 30 seconds and counting, about 30 seconds away from the first stage liquid oxygen tank being full. Three minutes.
Stage 1 lock load is complete.
You know, that call for stage 1 LOX load being complete. Coming up next will be the conclusion of fueling on stage 2, liquid oxygen. Coming up in about 30 seconds. Coming up on T-minus 2 minutes here. I want to thank Jackie Pacheco for a $10 super chat. Really appreciate that, Jackie.
Stage 2 lock load is complete.
Thank you for your ongoing support as a channel member. As you just heard, stage 2 LOX load is complete. At this point, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. Thanks to SG, one of our other channel members, for a $5 super chat. Really appreciate that. Coming up on the ground gas closeouts, which you can see here from our cameras at the press site.
Ground gas closeout.
That's that call you just heard. Falcon 9 will enter into startup coming up in about 15 seconds. It's the point at which control of the countdown is switched over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and they pressurize the propellant tanks. 1 minute.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Good call out here. We are now waiting for the SpaceX launch director to give their go for launch today. That's coming up in about 5 seconds.
LD, go for launch.
And with that call, the Falcon 9 is ready for flight. Just about 30 seconds left to go here. We'll return to our live chat momentarily after liftoff, but let's go ahead and keep our focus on this Falcon 9 as we're now just about 20 seconds from liftoff. 15 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 10-5 mission. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Passing through max Q momentarily. This is traveling faster than the speed of sound. Good call for max Q. Coming up on a few different events in fairly rapid succession here. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, where the first stage booster engines will cease firing. It's coming up at T plus 2 minutes 29 seconds. That'll be followed a few seconds later by stage separation. Then the Merlin vacuum engine will ignite, and then the fairings will be deployed at T plus 3 minutes. For the call for MVAC chill down, they're thermally conditioning that Merlin vacuum engine ahead of its ignition. Some great work by our tracking team this morning. Now 2 minutes into flight. Miko. You see condition of the Merlin vacuum engine. There's events happening in the slight delay from the SpaceX feed on the right-hand side of your screen, coming up on payload fairing separation. Still got views of both stages in Chuck's camera. And there go the payload fairings. Now T plus 4 minutes into flight. Coming up, the next event will be the first stage entry burn. It's coming up at T plus 6 minutes and 3 seconds. Giving the lighting here, it is unlikely that our ground cameras will be able to see the entry burn when it begins. We'll keep our cameras to the sky on the off chance that we can, but more than likely we'll need to rely on the onboard cameras from the SpaceX Falcon vehicle. Some great views from both stages currently. Still a nominal mission by all accounts. So we're coming up on the 5th minute into flight. Those bursts you're seeing between the grid fins on the Falcon 9 first stage, those are the cold gas thrusters. Those are helping to adjust the attitude or the positioning of the Falcon 9 first stage booster as it orients itself in preparation for the entry burn to begin. Taking a look up in the inner stage here, this vantage point. Of course, SpaceX will continue to toggle views on the upper stage engine, looking back at that Merlin. Now less than 10 seconds from seeing the entry burn begin from the SpaceX feed.
Stage 1, FGS is saved.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
You heard the call out and you see the entry burn underway. This burn lasting just a little more than 20 seconds.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
Just less than a minute now from the first stage landing burn beginning. It's coming up at T plus 7 minutes and 50 seconds, setting the first stage booster B-1085 to touch down on the drone ship at about T plus 8 minutes and 14 seconds.
Stage 1 transonic.
We're about 10 seconds from hearing the call out for first stage landing burn beginning.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Stage 2 terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
And for the very first time, booster 1085 safely down on the drone ship with shortfall of gravitas under what appears to be a somewhat stormy sky,
Stage
or at least a very
2,
cloudy
FGS
one.
is saved.
And back shutdown.
And with that, we're going to begin to wind down our live coverage with a successful liftoff and landing of that first stage booster, which will now go on to return to Port Canaveral and start to be prepared for the launch of the Crew 9 mission coming up on September 24th at the earliest. And with that in the rearview mirror, let's go ahead and take a look at the mission stats for SpaceX as they currently stand. As this was the, again, first flight of B-1085. This marked the 366th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 81st Falcon 9 flight of 2024. This was the 300, well, there wasn't a new Falcon booster reflight since this was a new booster, so that number holds at 309. This was the 84th SpaceX launch of 2024, including one Falcon Heavy launch and 2 launches of the Starship rocket. This is SpaceX's 122nd orbital launch in the last 365 days, the 201st orbital launch from Pad 40, and the 256th overall launch from this pad. Taking a look at the bar chart here, we're getting pretty close to tying the total number of launches that SpaceX managed in all of 2023. SpaceX still optimistic that they can hit their goal of 144 missions, or an average of 12 launches monthly over the course of this year. Moving on to some recovery stats, this was the 80th landing of a booster on the drone ship, a shortfall of Gravitas. This was SpaceX's 267th drone ship landing and the 341st booster landing to date. Finally, some industry stats. This was the 59th launch from Florida, the 88th orbital launch from U.S. soil this year, the 97th from a U.S. rocket company, and the 153rd from around the world. With 6 orbital launch failures on the year so far, here's where our pie chart stands. The U.S. with those 97 launches still holds 63% of the pie. China, 37 missions, about a quarter of the pie here. Russia just launched its 9th not too long ago with that uncrewed Progress vehicle. It's looking to send up a crewed mission, including NASA astronaut Don Pettit, launching on September 11th at the earliest. India just launched its 3rd mission of the year not too long ago as well. Japan has 4 so far this year, Iran with 2, and North Korea and the European Space Agency with 1 apiece. Although ESA is preparing to launch its next mission, which will be the final flight of a Vega rocket. That's coming up in the not too distant future as well. Lots of things to look forward to this fall. And of course, in the very much not too distant future, you've got Polaris Dawn coming up on Monday. Again, first launch opportunity is at 3:38 a.m. Set your alarm clocks now. Don't want to oversleep that one, as it'll be an historic crew mission with the goal of conducting a number of firsts, including the first commercial spacewalk. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Spaceflight Now as well. Turn on notifications. We'll have videos on that forthcoming about the mission, about the crew, as well as some other happenings around here. We've got the Rocket Lab Escapade satellites that just arrived here in Florida. So we've got some content coming forward on that, as well as some more stuff from our visit to Southern California. So lots of reasons to be with us here at Spaceflight Now, and certainly appreciate all of our channel members that make this type of robust